My sons never came. The hospital called them 3 times. 3 times. And both of them let it ring. I know this because Dr. Okafor told me himself, his voice careful and low, like he was delivering a verdict he hadn't asked to deliver. When I finally understood what he was saying, I didn't cry. I just stared at the water stain on the ceiling above my bed and thought about the Little League games I never missed. Not one. 31 years of showing up, and they couldn't answer a phone. But they came eventually. Oh, they came, just not for me. They came for the house. And when they walked into that room and found it empty, just a folded letter on the pillow, I'm told the color left their faces like someone had pulled a drain. I wasn't there to see it. I was already gone. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. Before we go further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to know who's out there with me tonight. The pain woke me before anything else did. A deep, grinding pressure behind my sternum, the kind that doesn't ask permission. My eyes opened to a white ceiling, too bright, humming with fluorescent light. The smell hit me next, antiseptic, and something metallic underneath it, like the air itself had been scrubbed clean of anything human. I tried to sit up. My left arm pulled tight. An IV line. My legs felt like wet cement. I turned my head slowly. A monitor blinked beside me. Green numbers I didn't understand. On the small table beside the bed, my wallet, my wedding ring, and the old leather watch band I'd worn every day for 19 years. The face was cracked down the middle. I stared at that crack for a long time. "Mr. Aldridge," a voice from the doorway. A woman in scrubs, mid-40s, with tired eyes that had seen too much and still managed to look kind. Her badge read D.R. Patricia Okafor. "You're awake. Good. What happened?" My voice came out like gravel dragged across asphalt. "You had a cardiac event," she said, coming to stand beside me, checking my chart with the practiced calm of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "Your neighbor found you on your kitchen floor, called 911. You're lucky she did. My neighbor, Dorothy, from next door, 72 years old and sharper than anyone I knew. She must have seen my light still on past midnight. My sons," I said. "Did anyone call them?" Dr. Okafor set the chart down on the edge of the bed. She didn't rush to answer, and that pause, that 2-second pause, told me everything before she said a single word. "We contacted both of them, yes. And?" She looked at me steadily. "Marcus said he was in the middle of a work trip and couldn't get away. He asked us to keep him updated." She stopped there, but her jaw tightened slightly. "And Damon?" She picked up the chart again. "Not because she needed to read it," Damon said. "And I want you to understand, I'm just relaying what was said. He told the nurse on call that you were, quote, a grown man who could handle his own problems." The room went very quiet. I heard the monitor beep. Once, twice, steady as a metronome, completely indifferent to the fact that my chest had just caved in for a second time that night. And this time there was no medical explanation for it. A grown man who could handle his own problems. I closed my eyes. Behind them I saw Damon at 9 years old, running a fever of 104, and me driving 60 miles through a January ice storm to get him to urgent care because his mother was working a double shift and there was no one else. I saw Marcus at 17, wrapped around a telephone pole on Route 9 in my Silverado, and me sprinting through the ER doors so fast I slipped on the tile and hit my knee so hard it swelled for a month. I hadn't even felt it until 3 days later. I was there. I was always there. "Mr. Aldridge," Dr. Okafor said softly. "Call me Walter," I said without opening my eyes. "Walter." She paused. "You need rest. You've been through something serious. We're going to monitor you for the next 48 hours, and then we can talk about next steps." "All right." She left. The door swung shut behind her with a soft, mechanical click, and I was alone with the monitor and the cracked watch band and the sound of the hospital going on around me. All that busy noise of people trying to save lives, completely unaware that mine had just changed shape in a way I hadn't been prepared for. I lay there for a long time, not sleeping, just listening. Somewhere down the hall, a family was crying with what sounded like relief. Someone had made it. Someone was going to be okay. I listened to the sound of people who showed up, and I felt something go very still inside me. My late wife's name was Renata. She died 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She went fast, and I was grateful for that, even as it broke me, because she didn't suffer long. What I was not grateful for, what I would carry for the rest of my life, was that in those 11 weeks, our sons came to see her exactly twice, combined. They both lived less than 3 hours away. I had told myself stories about why. Marcus was under pressure at work, a manager now at a logistics company in Charlotte. Always some deadline, some crisis. Damon was between jobs, again, and said the drive was hard on him emotionally. Said he couldn't handle seeing her like that. I'd accepted those stories. I'd needed to. Renata had not accepted them. Near the end, when she still had clarity, she'd looked at me from her hospital bed, a bed very much like this one, and said, quietly, "Walter, I want you to see them for what they are, not what you need them to be." I hadn't been ready to hear that. I still loved her for saying it. Now, lying in the dark, I finally heard her. It was the second morning before I reached for my phone. It had been on the table the whole time. Dr. Terzis. Okafor must have had someone retrieve it from my house along with my other belongings. I picked it up and looked at the screen. 2 texts from Marcus. The first, sent 12 hours after the hospital had called him. "Hey, Dad. Heard you had a health scare. Hope you're resting. Let me know if you need anything." The second, sent the following morning, haven't heard back. Everything okay? Nothing from Damon, not a single word. I set the phone down and looked out the window. The sky over Memphis was the flat white of early March, the kind of sky that can't decide what it wants to be. I thought about the house. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, corner lot on Sycamore Drive. The oak tree in the front yard that Renata had planted as a sapling the year Marcus was born. 34 years of mortgage payments, paid off 6 years ago. I thought about what it was worth. Then I thought about the fact that I'd had a conversation with Marcus 6 months ago, Thanksgiving, when he brought his girlfriend Trish for the first time, and over dessert he'd mentioned, casually, very casually, that the housing market in our neighborhood had really appreciated. Said it the way you say something you've been thinking about for a while and have decided to test in the open air. I'd changed the subject. I hadn't wanted to understand what he was getting at. I understood now. I called Robert. Robert Finch had been my attorney for 22 years, since the contracting business, since the lawsuits, since everything. He was 68 years old, retired from full practice but still kept a small client list, mostly old friends. He picked up on the third ring. "Walter, you had me worried. Dorothy called me." "Good old Dorothy," I said. "How are you feeling?" Like a man who got a lot of things clear at once. There was a brief silence. Robert knew me well enough to know what that meant. "Talk to me." I talked. I told him about the hospital calls, about Damon's response, about Marcus's texts, about Thanksgiving and the casual comment about property values, about the specific, particular way I suddenly saw the last 6 years since Renata died, laid out like a map I'd been refusing to read. Every holiday they'd skipped. Every time I'd offered help, and they'd taken it without thanks, without reciprocation. The money I'd lent Damon twice, never repaid. The down payment I'd contributed to Marcus's condo, framed at the time as a gift but understood, I think, by both of us as something that would come with a relationship attached, with a son attached, and hadn't. "I want to change the will," I said. "Everything." Robert didn't miss a beat. "I can have new documents drawn up. Airtight. How do you want to structure it?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but not them, not a cent." "All right," he said. "I'll start preparing. You focus on getting out of that bed." I hung up and lay back against the pillow. My chest ached, but differently than before, cleaner somehow, like a wound that had finally been opened and cleaned out properly. Dr. Okafor came in around noon to check on me, And she brought a student with her, a young man who reminded me of Damon at that age. Same jawline, same way of standing, like the world owed him a little patience. I watched the young man while Dr. Okafor reviewed my numbers, and I thought, somebody raised you. Somebody sat up with you when you were sick and drove through storms to reach you, and handed over down payments and co-signed loans and poured themselves out like water on good soil. I hope you know that. I hope you understand what that cost. You're healing well, Dr. Okafor said, bringing me back. I'd like to keep you through tomorrow, then we can talk discharge. Good, I said. I have things to do. She almost smiled. I believe you. After she left, I lay quietly and let myself think about the moments I usually kept behind glass, the ones I looked at but didn't touch. Marcus at 5, refusing to let go of my hand on the first day of kindergarten. Damon learning to ride his bike on the driveway of the Sycamore house, over and over, falling and getting up, while I held the back of the seat and ran alongside him, and the exact second he realized I'd let go and he was riding alone, the way he looked back at me with pure, uncomplicated joy. I had been his whole world in that moment. The feeling of being someone's whole world. There is nothing else like it. Those boys were still inside these men somewhere. I believed that. But I had stopped being willing to hurt myself trying to reach them. I slept better that night than I had in months. The call from Marcus came on my third morning. I'd been expecting it. Not because he was worried, I knew that now, clearly, but because Robert had made a discreet phone call to the county clerk's office and word had a way of traveling. Or perhaps Marcus had simply run his calculations and realized that silence was no longer the smart play. Dad. His voice was warm, practiced. Marcus had always been the smoother of the two, better at surfaces. I've been so worried I should have come. I know that. Things at work have been... It's not an excuse. I'm sorry. Okay, I said. A brief pause. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected either an argument or an open door, and okay was neither. I want to come see you, he said. I can be there tomorrow. I'll be home by tomorrow, I said. Dr. Chur's. Okafor's discharging me in the morning. Perfect. I'll come to the house. You can call first. Another pause, longer this time. Dad, is everything all right? You sound different. I feel different, I said honestly. What does that mean? It means I feel different, Marcus. I kept my voice even, almost gentle. I'll talk to you soon. I ended the call. Damon called 40 minutes later, and his approach was different, sharper, less patient. Damon had never been good at hiding what he wanted. Dad, I heard from Marcus that you're getting discharged. I think we should all sit down and talk. About the house, about everything. You had a serious health scare, and we need to make some plans. Plans, I said, about the future. About what happens if... Look, I'm not trying to be morbid, but we need to have a real conversation about your estate, about what makes sense going forward. The house is a lot to maintain on your own. There it was, not even a full 72 hours out of the cardiac unit, and my son was talking to me about what made sense going forward. I thought about Renata again. See them for what they are. I appreciate your concern, I said. I'll be in touch. Dad, I'm serious. I know you are, I said. Goodbye, Damon. I slept well again that night. Robert came to the hospital the next morning with the documents. He sat in the chair beside my bed, the same chair Dr. Okafor had used, the same chair that had probably held 1,000 people delivering news that changed things, and he spread the papers on the rolling table and walked me through everything slowly and thoroughly, the way he always had. No shortcuts, no assumptions. The new will directed the entirety of my estate. The house, the savings, the remnants of the contracting business I'd wound down after Renata died, to 3 places. A third to Riverside Community Church, where Renata and I had attended for 20 years and where the food pantry ran on a shoestring. A third to the Memphis Trades Academy, a vocational school on the South Side that trained young men and women for the kind of honest, skilled work I'd done my whole life. And a third to a scholarship fund established in Renata's name at the elementary school where she'd taught 2nd grade for 26 years. I signed everything. Robert notarized it. He folded the documents into his briefcase and snapped it shut, and then he just sat there for a moment, not in a hurry to leave. "You feel okay about this?" he asked. "I feel like myself," I said. "I haven't felt like myself in a long time." He nodded. "Renata would approve. I know she would." He stood, and we shook hands the way we always did, firm and brief, two old men who had been through things together and didn't need to dress it up. At the door, he paused. "I'll have the deed transfer paperwork ready by the end of the week," he said. "The church already knows about the bequest. The school and the academy will be notified today." "Thank you, Robert. Thank Dorothy, too," he said. "She's the one who called me." He left, and I began to get dressed. Nurse Adrian, who had been checking on me since the first night, a woman in her 50s who wore small gold hoop earrings and never seemed to run out of patience, came in while I was buttoning my shirt and raised an eyebrow at me. "You going somewhere, Mr. Aldridge?" "Discharged this morning," I said. "Dr. Okafor's orders, I know." She came over and straightened my collar without asking, the way my mother used to. "You've got family coming. A friend is picking me up." She studied me for a moment. "You take care of yourself, not for anyone else. For you." "Yes, ma'am," I said, and meant it. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out a sheet of the hospital's notepad paper from the drawer in the bedside table. The pen they'd given me, Patience, was cheap and skipped a little, but it worked. I wrote slowly, one page, front only. Not a long letter. Renata always said I communicated better in fewer words, and she was right about most things. "Marcus and Damon, by the time you read this, you will likely have already spoken with Robert Finch, or with each other, or with your own lawyers, and you will know the broad outline of what I've decided. This letter isn't about the money. I want you to understand that. This letter is about the night I spent in a hospital bed while your father's heart was doing something it shouldn't, and neither of you came. I am not writing to punish you. I am not writing because I hate you. I am writing because I love you, and because loving you clearly enough to let you face the consequences of who you become is the last thing I have to give you. Everything else I built is going to people who will use it the way your mother would have wanted, to make something, to feed someone, to give a child a chance. I hope one day you understand what was being asked of you and how simple it was. Your father, Walter." I folded the letter, wrote their names across the front, and left it on the pillow. Dorothy was waiting outside in her silver Buick, the engine already running. She was wearing her good coat, the burgundy one she saved for Sundays, and when I got in and shut the door, she looked me over the way mothers look at children returning from somewhere difficult. "You look lighter," she said. "Feel it." She pulled out of the parking lot without another word, which was exactly right. I watched the hospital shrink in the side mirror, its brick face receding behind us into the flat white Memphis sky, and I didn't feel the need to watch it go. I turned forward and looked at the road ahead. My phone rang while we were stopped at a light on Poplar. "Marcus." I looked at the screen for a moment, then placed the phone face down on my knee. The light changed. Dorothy drove. Outside, the city went about its Tuesday morning, oblivious and unhurried. A man walking a dog, two kids on the sidewalk with backpacks, a woman unlocking the door of a dry cleaning shop with the practiced motion of someone who has opened that door 1,000 times and expects to open it 1,000 more. I thought about the Trades Academy. I thought about the second graders who had sat in Renata's classroom, who had learned to read with her, who were probably adults now with children of their own. I thought about the food pantry, the tables set up in the church fellowship hall every Saturday morning, the quiet dignity of people waiting in line with their bags. That was where it was going. That was what 34 years of work and a paid-off house and a life built with both hands and no shortcuts was going to do. Not because I was a saint, because it was right. Because Renata would have done the same thing, and because somewhere inside me, underneath all the years of telling myself stories about my sons, I had always known what they were choosing. I had just loved them too much to stop choosing back. The phone buzzed again. This time Damon. I turned it over, looked at his name, and let it ring. Dorothy glanced at me from the corner of her eye. "Boys?" She made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. "My daughter didn't speak to me for 2 years when I changed my will." she said. Best 2 years of peace I ever had. I did laugh at that, a real one, and it surprised me a little how good it felt in my chest, how clean. Dorothy, I said. Mm-hmm. Thank you for calling 911. She reached over and patted my hand once, firmly. Somebody had to, she said. Lord knows they weren't going to. We drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the city rolling past the windows, and when she turned onto Sycamore Drive, I saw the house from half a block away. The oak tree in the front yard, bare-branched still in early March but unmistakably large, unmistakably present. The kind of tree that has been there long enough to belong to a place. Renata's tree. It was going to belong to the church soon, the whole property, all of it, and that was fine. It was more than fine. It had been a good house, it had held a good life. What it held was not in the walls. Dorothy pulled into the driveway, and I sat for a moment looking at the front porch, the worn boards, the swing we'd hung the summer. Marcus turned 3. You need help getting in? Dorothy asked. I'm all right, I said, and opened the door. The air outside was cold and clean and smelled like the season turning, the way March in Tennessee always does, like something deciding to try again. I stood at the foot of the porch steps and looked up at the house, and I thought, I built this. I kept this. And now I'm going to give it away, and that is mine to do, and it is enough. I climbed the steps one at a time, my hand on the railing, and went inside. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't really need and a yellow legal pad I used for making lists. I wrote down the names of the 3 organizations Robert would be contacting. Underneath them, I wrote Renata's name, and underneath that, I wrote second chances, not for me to give my sons, for strangers who deserve one. I underlined it. Then I sat back in my chair and listened to the house. It creaked the way old houses do in the cold, and the refrigerator hummed, and somewhere outside a car passed with its radio on, a few seconds of music that dissolved before I could identify it. Normal sounds. The sounds of a life. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Marcus, 2 from Damon, and 1 voicemail I didn't play. There would be more tomorrow. There would probably be lawyers involved at some point. There would be raised voices and accusations, and appeals to guilt that I had spent too many years susceptible to. I knew all of that was coming, and I felt something that took me a moment to name. Ready. That was the word. I felt ready. On the legal pad below everything else I wrote, Community Center. Look into it. The Trades Academy had mentioned they were trying to expand into a community workshop space, evening classes, weekend programs, tools and instruction available to anyone who wanted to learn. I had a contracting background. I had contacts. I was 67 years old, and my heart had just reminded me that time was not a renewable resource, and I had no intention of spending what remained of it waiting for my sons to become who I had raised them to be. I closed the legal pad, finished my coffee, and washed the mug in the sink. The oak tree in the front yard caught the streetlight through the kitchen window, its bare branches making a pattern on the wall that shifted slowly as the wind moved. I watched it for a while. Renata had carried that tree home from a nursery in a paper pot when it was barely 2 feet tall. Now it was 40 feet if it was an inch, and it would be standing on this corner long after every person who knew its history was gone. That was something. That counted. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and I slept without dreaming. Deep and solid and uninterrupted, the sleep of a man who has finally set down a weight he carried so long he forgot he was carrying it. Thank you for being here with me tonight. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Walter. I'll be right here. There's something I've come to understand about the way life works, not as punishment, not as reward, but as consequence. Every choice a person makes sends a ripple outward, and eventually every ripple comes back, not because the universe is keeping score, because that's simply the nature of how things move. Walter spent 40 years building something real, not just a house on Sycamore Drive, not just a contracting business or a paid-off mortgage. He built a way of showing up. He drove through ice storms. He ran through emergency room doors so fast he injured himself and didn't notice for 3 days. He wrote checks he didn't ask to be repaid. He sat beside a hospital bed for 11 weeks and held a hand until there was no hand left to hold. That was the life he constructed, brick by brick, out of choices nobody forced him to make. And Marcus and Damon, they made choices too, smaller ones at first. The holiday skipped, the call not returned, the loan quietly forgotten. None of those things feel like decisions in the moment. They feel like convenience. They feel like, well, he'll understand. He always understands. But convenience practiced long enough becomes character. And character, when the phone rings at 2 a.m. from a cardiac unit in Memphis, is exactly what answers, or doesn't. That is the thing about integrity that nobody wants to sit with. It is not built in the dramatic moments. It is built in the ordinary ones, in the small daily decision to show up or not show up, to honor the people who poured themselves out for you, or to simply take what they offered and move on. Marcus and Damon were not born cold. Nobody is born cold. They were shaped, day by day, choice by choice, into men who had learned that their Father's love was unconditional in a way that required nothing of them. And that is a failure of character, yes. But it is also a failure of wisdom. They never learned to look ahead. They never understood that what you practice, you become. Walter understood it. That is why what he did with that legal pad, with Robert's briefcase snapping shut, with a folded letter left on a hospital pillow, that was not bitterness. That was clarity. The clarity of a man who finally stopped negotiating with himself about what he already knew. It takes real courage to stop carrying a story that is no longer true, especially when that story is about your own children. Most people never find that courage. They keep hoping, keep excusing, keep absorbing the cost of other people's choices until there is nothing left to give. Walter chose differently. He chose to take what he had built, the years, the equity, the accumulated weight of a working man's life, and give it to strangers who would use it to build something. A child learning a trade, a second grader finding her way into words, a family fed on a Saturday morning who didn't know his name and didn't need to. That is intelligence in its truest form, not cleverness, not strategy. The intelligence to understand what actually matters and to act on it before time runs out. I think about the oak tree Renata planted as a sapling. It didn't grow because someone was watching. It grew because the conditions were right, because something was put in the ground with care, and because enough time passed. Walter is still here, and whatever he plants next will grow the same way, quietly, without asking permission, toward the light.